In the heart of a quiet, rural village, a boy named Frank grew up under the care of a humble couple who had nothing but love to give him. Though the couple worked long hours in the fields and did what they could to provide for Frank, life was tough. Frank learned from a young age that hard work was essential if he was to survive in this world. He spent his days laboring alongside his adoptive parents, tilling the land and tending to animals. They were poor, but they were content, living off the land in their small, weathered cottage at the edge of the village. The people of the village admired Frank. He was known for his good nature and willingness to help others, despite his own struggles, whether it was helping a neighbor repair a broken fence or carrying water from the river for an elderly woman. Frank's kindness was boundless. His reputation as a hard worker and a kind soul spread throughout the village, and everyone respected him for his honesty and integrity. But Frank's life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. Unbeknownst to Frank, he had a twin brother named John, who had been raised in a world far different from his own as infants. The twins had been separated under strange circumstances. Their biological parents, desperate and struggling to survive, had made the difficult decision to give one of their children, Frank, to a childless couple in the village who had promised to love and care for him. Meanwhile, John had been taken by another family. With vast wealth and power in the city, John's adoptive family lived in a grand mansion, where luxury was the norm. He was raised with every privilege imaginable, attending the finest schools, wearing the best clothes, and never wanting for anything. However, with this wealth came a sense of entitlement. John became accustomed to using his family's influence to get what he wanted. As he grew older, he developed a ruthless streak. He began to take advantage of his family's wealth and power, manipulating those around him to achieve his goals. John's life of indulgence led him down a dark path. He surrounded himself with people who shared his love for thrill-seeking and recklessness. Soon, his desires for power and control took a sinister turn. He began to associate with criminals, drawn to the excitement and danger they represented. Among his new friends were thieves, con artists, and other unsavory characters who took what they wanted without regard for the law. John's arrogance and disregard for the consequences of his actions led him further into the criminal underworld. One fateful day, John and his gang of criminals decided to pull off a heist that would be the talk of the city for years to come. They meticulously planned and executed the robbery of a large bank in the city center, making off with millions of dollars in cash and valuables. It was a daring, audacious crime, and for a time, John reveled in the success of their plan. He was certain that he had outwitted the authorities and would never be caught, but John's arrogance blinded him to the risks he had taken. In his haste to flee the scene, he left behind a small but critical piece of evidence. A surveillance camera had caught his face just before he slipped out of the bank. The authorities quickly put out a warrant for his arrest, but by the time they arrived at his home, John had already disappeared. Using his connections to go into hiding as the investigation unfolded, the police discovered that John had a twin brother. When they tracked down Frank, who bore an uncanny resemblance to John, they believed they had found their man. Despite Frank's protest that he had never even set foot in the city, the police were convinced that he was the criminal they were searching for. After all, the man caught on camera looked exactly like him. Frank was arrested and thrown into a jail cell, far away from the life he had known in the village. The trial was swift and brutal. Frank was found guilty of the bank robbery and sentenced to prison for a crime he had no part in. His heart was heavy with disbelief and sorrow as he was led away in chains. His life turned upside down in the blink of an eye. Prison was a harsh place, filled with men who had committed terrible crimes. Frank, innocent and unaccustomed to such a life, struggled to adapt. The cold, grey walls of the prison felt like they were closing in on him, suffocating him with the weight of his unjust imprisonment. But even in the darkest of places, Frank's kind heart and gentle nature shone through. He treated his fellow inmates with respect, refusing to let bitterness and anger consume him. One day, Frank was assigned a new cellmate, a man named Charlie. Charlie was a seasoned criminal who had spent many years in and out of prison. At first, he seemed like a typical inmate, tough, cynical, and hardened by life behind bars. But as the days passed, Charlie began to notice something unusual about Frank. Unlike most of the men in the prison, Frank seemed out of place. He wasn't rough or violent. Instead, he was quiet, thoughtful, and kind. He didn't belong in prison, and Charlie could sense it. Curious, Charlie began to ask Frank about his life and how he had ended up in prison. Frank, grateful for someone to talk to, told Charlie his story. He explained how he had been wrongly accused of robbing a bank, how the police had mistaken him for someone else, and how he had never even been to the city where the crime had taken place. As Frank spoke, something clicked in Charlie's mind. He had once known a man who looked exactly like Frank, a man named John Charlie had been friends with John in his younger days. Before John had disappeared into the criminal underworld, John had the same sharp features, the same intense eyes, and the same confident posture that Frank possessed, but there was one thing that set them apart. John had a distinctive birthmark on his chest, a mark that Charlie had never forgotten. "Do you have a birthmark on your chest?" Charlie asked one day, interrupting Frank's story. Frank looked puzzled. "No, I don't. Why do you ask?" Charlie nodded, the pieces of the puzzle finally coming together. In his mind he realized that Frank must have a twin brother, John, the man he had known all those years ago, and if John had been the one to commit the robbery, then Frank had been wrongfully imprisoned. "I think I know who really robbed that bank," Charlie said quietly. He went on to explain his connection to John, how they had once been friends, and how he believed that John was the real criminal. He told Frank about the birthmark and shared stories of his past with John, filling in the gaps of Frank's life that he had never known at first. Frank found it hard to believe that he had a twin brother, let alone one who had framed him for such a terrible crime. But as Charlie recounted his memories of John, Frank couldn't deny the truth. He had a brother out there, living a life of wealth and privilege, while he had been left to suffer the consequences of John's action. Determined to clear Frank's name, Charlie reached out to the authorities. He told them everything he knew about John, providing them with details about the birthmark and their connection to each other. At first, the police were skeptical, but as they investigated further, they began to see the truth. Witnesses who had seen the robbery confirmed that John, not Frank, had been the man they had seen fleeing the scene. The birthmark matched, and eventually, John's criminal associates turned on him, revealing his role in the heist. It took months of back and forth with the legal system, but eventually, Frank was exonerated and released from prison. He walked out of the gates a free man, but the weight of what he had endured still hung heavy on his shoulders. He had lost precious years of his life, time that he could never get back. The injustice of it all gnawed at him, but Frank refused to let bitterness take root in his heart. He had been given a second chance, and he was determined to make the most of it. As Frank tried to rebuild his life, something unexpected happened one afternoon. While he was sitting quietly by a stream near the village, a sleek black car pulled up beside him. From the car emerged an elderly couple, their faces lined with worry and their eyes filled with tears. They approached Frank cautiously, as if afraid that he might disappear at any moment. "Are you Frank?" the woman asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," Frank replied, standing up slowly. "Who are you?" The couple exchanged a glance before the man stepped forward. "We're your real parents." Frank's heart skipped a beat. His real parents. He had always known that he had been adopted by the couple who had raised him, but he had never imagined that he might meet his biological parents one day. Through tearful confessions, the elderly couple explained what had happened all those years ago when Frank and John were infants. Their parents had been struggling to survive. With heavy hearts, they had made the difficult decision to give Frank to a childless couple in the village, believing that it was the best way to ensure his safety and well-being. The couple had promised to raise Frank as their own, and for a time, everything had seemed to be going well. But tragedy struck when Frank's adoptive parents passed away suddenly. By the time his biological parents realized what had happened, Frank had already disappeared from their lives. They had searched for him for years, but without any leads. They had all but given up.